Hi, good morning and welcome to Front Porch Conversations here at Advent Christian Village. We're at the Harmony Center this morning and we have as our guest Ken and Ethel Randolph. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you.
And I know that both of you you moved here together about 5 months ago?
We're working on it, right?
Almost 5, okay.
The 20th.
So both of you have very interesting lives that you've lived thus far, and I want to have our viewers know more about you. So we are going to do something a little different today. At this point, we're going to have just Ken here to talk with me, and Ethel will come back and join us, and then we'll hear their combined story. Thank you both. Ken, thank you so much for coming and sitting down with me and having this conversation today. Tell us a little bit about where you were born and where you grew up.
I was born in Elliott, Maine. Grew up on a farm. There were six of us, and had an opportunity to work the farm, all of us working together, and had big gardens, had a lot of chickens, cows, and boarded work horses.
And so you had to feed those cows and collect those eggs in deep snow and
we had to do it before we went to school. Then we had manure on our boots, and we smelled like a cow. So we didn't have too much problem with a lot of people being around. And I never played any sports because I always had to be back to work on the farm.
And did you live in Elliott until you finished school?
Yes.
What are some of your fond memories of growing up?
Working. That's my middle name. I'm a workaholic.
Sounds like you got real indoctrination early on.
Yes.
After you graduated from high school, what happened next?
Well, I wanted to be a civil engineer. So I went off to college. I went for a year and a half. And I was overwhelmed with the math and all that, so I came back home.
And what happened next?
Well, I had been dating a young lady before I went to school, and when I came back home, we weren't home very long. I wasn't home very long, and we got married.
And that marriage lasted how many years?
52 years.
And that's one reason we're doing this in separate segments, because you both have had separate lives for many years until recently. But we'll get to that story.
Okay.
And did you continue to live in Elliott, Maine after you got married?
For a short while, we moved to, I was drafted. During the Vietnam War. Mm-hmm. They were drafting 50,000 men
right.
A year. Yeah. And so I went in the service, and that really changed things in my life.
What branch of the service did you go in?
Army.
And what was your job in the Army?
I was in infantry, and actually, it was an airborne infantry. And I decided with some other men to go airborne. So I went through that training. That was much more difficult than the basic training.
Right.
And so I had the privilege of jumping out of planes.
Perfectly good planes? Planes in good condition you jumped out of?
Yeah, right.
Sometimes people say, well, why would you jump out of a perfectly good airplane, you know? And how long did you serve? 2
years.
And did you serve overseas?
I was over in Germany. They sent the troops, rather than being greenhorns, to go to Vietnam. Mm-hmm. They set up training over there with people that had been to Nam, so that they could train these men and then send them to Nam.
But you didn't go actually into country?
No, a levy came down, and they said anything over 90 days, and I had 94 days. So I opted out. to not go. In the beginning, I wanted to go. It gets you all fired up to go because you're taught and prepared to fight, to kill. And so, not that you want to kill people, but you want to be involved in the front lines.
And you've trained and worked with certain people and would want to be with them, I'm sure.
Yeah, we were up in the mountains, the Baumhover Mountains in Germany, and that's where all the training was. It snowed, it rained, a lot of winter, just like New England. Yeah.
So when you finished your service, you came back home.
Yes, I came back and we moved to Vermont. We had been in Vermont when we were dating, and we liked an area up there, so we moved up there. I got a job and went to work on a farm.
Later on in your career, you've done some other things, though.
Yes.
Tell us about your children.
Well, I have a boy and a girl, Scott and Melissa. And they're precious kids. And Scott is teaching now in a Christian school, and Melissa is married to a pastor, and they are pastoring churches.
In what area?
They are in Fish Creek. Melissa is in Fish Creek, Wisconsin, and Scott's in Elliott, Maine.
How would you describe, you had described yourself to me about your relationship as a father and your work life. Do you mind sharing a little bit about that?
Well, when Joyce and I got married, I was no more prepared to be a father or a husband. I would use an excuse of working. And I know there was a period of time I worked 7 days a week, 18 hours a day. So I was up before my children got up, and I came home after they had gone to bed. And I didn't realize at that point, because God was like a window shade to me. If I needed him, I pulled him down. If I didn't need him, I left him up. And I'm not proud of that, but that's where I was in my everyday life.
I appreciate you sharing that, because it's hard, but it helps to form who you are and where you've come to now, I think. And you and your children have a good relationship now, and
we do, but there's something that really happened in my life that began to change.
Why don't you share that with you?
Well, when we moved to Vermont, construction stopped, and I had a problem. I worked a full-time job as a plumber, but I also did moonlighting. And that's where I really learned how to work, because when you're working with master plumbers, then you're the apprentice, they're doing all the work. But people that asked me, I didn't advertise, it's just word of mouth, but I never could say, no, I can't. I need to be home with my wife and my family. So for many years, the first years of my life, well into my 30s, that's what I did.
And what changed?
Well, when we were up in Vermont, we had built a log cabin into a hillside in Vermont that overlooked all the White Mountains. We could sit up in bed and look at the snow on top of the mountain.
Wow.
And we thought, well, this is where we'll be for the rest of our lives. We were in a good community. We were in a good church. Our kids are going to Christian school. And my wife worked at the school also. But I was home, sitting. I was busy because I finished the whole inside of the house, all the wiring, carpentry, and everything. But I would sit there and put wood on the fire, and there was a Bible on an end table, and that's when I began to get to know my God. And that was beginning to change in my life. I realized it wasn't all about me, but it was all about Him and what He wanted. And the kids were involved in Awana. Mm-hmm. And so I was involved in Awana with them. And the Bible Memory Association books that they were using, I memorized all the verses under subjects. And of course I had to say them to people. Mm-hmm. That's where I really began to get a hunger for God and His Word. And we were there for 5 years. And what I did is I worked during the summer and was off during the winter time. So therefore, I had a lot of time to read the Word, and I started getting involved with different people. I would, if they built a new house, I put them in a whole heating system in a bathroom for free. And I plowed a lot of snow, but my life was changing. When I was 10 or 11, I wanted to be a forester, and I could be up in a fire tower, and I wouldn't have to deal with people, because one person was a crowd to me. I had a sheltered life as a boy on the farm. And God began to change that because He had a purpose for my life, which I didn't have a purpose other than myself, my family. And so it came to the point that the house was God's, mine, and Joyce's. And it came to that point in my journey where it says, well, Ken, the first thing was, Ken, I want you to go to Bible school. And I wanted to go to Bible school because I was excited to learn more about God. I was thrilled. And so towards the end of the 5 years, he said, well, Ken, that house that's my house. And I want you and Joyce to sell that. So we put it up for sale, and we had an opportunity to go to a Bible Institute down in Massachusetts. And we didn't think much about the kids and their relationships with other kids. We just pulled them up out of that and went. Because this was about God now, not us. And Joyce, she really wasn't, she was with me, but to the point, well, if I go to Bible school, I can be a better Sunday school teacher. And she wasn't thinking beyond that because we really didn't know. But while we were in that church, it was a very missionized or missionary vision church. And we had a lot of those missionaries. We had a 4-bedroom home. So we would have those people come and stay. And God was using that for us to be challenged to missions. And so that's one thing that He really used in our lives. And when we actually packed up to go, we got a call from, I don't know what was in the family, that her dad had passed in Florida. And we had the truck pretty much loaded, and we kind of looked at each other and said, well, what's the Lord want us to do? Unload the truck and stay, or go? So we went. And we're glad we went. But so that's probably where the fire began in me.
And where were you being called to?
Well, we had a lot of missionaries that had stayed with us from Brazil. And Brazil has a lot of needs. Brazil's the size of the United States without Alaska or Hawaii. And some of those people became dear to us. We began praying for them when they went on the field. So that's the direction that we went in, was New Tribes mission. A faith mission. I wanted to be with a faith mission. I thought that was important. And the thing about New Tribes is after Bible school, they have 2 more years of training to put feet to your faith, where other missions don't require that. But we appreciated that because that was a growing time for us, for these boot camps to set up where you have an apartment. You don't have a bathroom facility in your apartment. You have to wash your clothes down in a wash house, and I don't know if we were still using the washboards or not, but it was back, quite a few years. And Joyce did a lot of that in Brazil because we didn't have any power. And anyway, it really cemented more our marriage and our relationship with our kids, because our kids were with us. And it was a growing time. And so we were thankful for that.
And you told me you had to learn a language?
Yeah, I had to learn Portuguese, and not only the language, but the culture. They put the culture and the language equal. And I've done a lot of things in life, and I bowled a lot physically, but I'd never done anything as difficult to learn a language. I spent a couple of years in a hammock memorizing. I had a verb wheel with 2,000 verbs on it. Each verb had 17 tenses, and I memorized both sides of that verb wheel. And I was like a little kid. I'd get a phrase by be doing a dialogue, and I want to go use it. And Joyce was more, she wanted to, whatever she said, she wanted to speak correctly, because that's the way she was. So that was quite an undertaking, but God accomplished it.
And where in Brazil did you go?
We served in the southern part, Rio Grande do Sul and Paraná.
And with indigenous people, correct?
Yes, those first few years,
jungles.
those first years. We did work with Brazilians. We did Bible studies when we were working with the Indians, when we had time.
Oh, okay.
So we would, and most all of it was chronological teaching that we used.
You spoke a little bit about that when we visited the other day. Would you share a little bit more about that with our viewers?
Well, we were with New Tribes for many years, and we came home, and God was changing things. And we went with another mission called Good Seed International that had a chronological approach, which was a great discipleship program. I've tried to encourage many pastors to do that with their new believers, because people need to know this study wasn't about churches or religions, but it was about God and His Word. So Joyce and I had the privilege of doing those eventually all over Brazil. We traveled. And that to me is very important. I love to give those studies.
And how long were you in Brazil total?
Well, we came home the last time in 2015. It was over 20 years. I never kept track of it because they would have us, the second mission would have us go down for 4 months at a time. We didn't actually go back there to live for a whole term.
Mm-hmm. In sharing about the way you feel ministry needs to happen, it kind of changed your way to interact with others and your hunger and you for more. Is that correct?
Yeah, God took me from being a sheltered person to be a person that loved people. And that was so necessary because the Bible says that we're to love each other, even on our enemies.
Right.
And I needed that change. And being in the training, the Bible school and the training, I had a lot more involvement with people. And that was very helpful for me. I emphasize getting to know God because God's purpose for us is to understand not what we can do, but what He's already done for us. And He wants us to trust only in what Jesus Christ did on that cross, plus nothing. And if we can understand then it's all about Him and not about us. And I'm just thankful that I got books on the cross, and I just did a lot of reading about, because the Bible says, I think it's in Luke 9:23 and 24, but to be of a disciple of Jesus Christ, we must deny ourselves, take up our cross, and follow Him. If we can't do that, we're not being the disciple that He wants us to be. Where His Holy Spirit lives within us, has that freedom to use us as a vessel, a broken vessel, for His purposes in life and ministry. And that was essential. And when that became a reality in my life and we went to Brazil, we were there to win people for Jesus Christ. That's the purpose. We were there and no other.
Once you came back to live in the United States in 2015 full time, is that correct? Or did you?
Yes.
How did your ministry evolve during those years?
Well, Joyce and I were already we came home the first time in the end of 2004. And we went with this other mission, and we were doing those chronological Bible studies. We were the representatives in New England, and then we actually went down to Florida, became a representation there because the pastor wanted us to come and do these studies in his church. And at the same time, the mission said, Ken, you asked us if you could go and do that ministry, but we were just noticing there's 200,000 Brazilians in Florida. Would you be willing to start a ministry working with the pastors? And I did that for about 6 years.
And did you move around during that time, or were you just traveling to those individual areas?
Well, first, we were going to Brazil 4 months of every year, and then we'd come back. So in January, the end of the year, we would go down to Florida. We'd work within this church, RV parks, other churches doing the study. Then we would go to Florida, go to Brazil for 4 months. Come back. I'd go back to work. We had lost most of our support in the first when we came home with new tribes. Mm-hmm. So I earned the money for us to go back down to Brazil and travel around for 4 months doing the work.
And during that time, you became a widower, correct?
I did. In 2017, I lost Joyce. And that was a difficult time for me because she was involved in everything we did. We always did the studies together. She was right there. I didn't blame God. I knew He had a purpose for it. And I'm glad she's in heaven and not having to live in this life here. But she had ovarian cancer, the same thing her mother had. And so I lost her. And I had a pastor up in Florida where I was working. He says, Ken, how are you doing? I says, well, I'm lonely, I'm grieving, but I'm not looking.
Why don't we stop here for
All
now?
right.
Welcome to part 2. I'd like to introduce again Ethel, Randolph, and Ethel. Would you share with us a little bit about your early life, where you grew up?
Yes, I'd love to do that. I'm a Wisconsin girl, and I grew up on a little 36 square mile island at the tip of the Door County Peninsula in Lake Michigan.
Which is a beautiful area.
It truly is. It's also a very big tourist attracting area. And I grew up on a dairy farm, like I said, and I was the oldest girl of 7 children. And so I learned at an early age to be responsible. And with 4 brothers, there was good appetites, so I learned how to cook. I baked 5 loaves of bread every other day, and among the other things. And it was an amazing life. And, it's all we knew. If you looked at it in reality, we had nothing. However, we had everything. We had good food and a warm bed to sleep in and companionship among the siblings, and we also had a family of first cousins with just as many kids as ours. So there was always things to do and fun things.
And growing up with many cousins around, and sounds like you had a lot of fun doing those things.
We did. We really did. And because I worked quite hard for Mom, I also did laundry, the old, the wringer type washer and all that. Holidays were very special. I got to go and play with the rest of my siblings, and Mom always prepared our banquet type meals for us. And that was an unbelievable treat. And the other thing she would do on Saturdays is bake a special cake, because we rarely had desserts of that nature. So there were those moments that it was really, really special.
Did you attend school on the island?
We did. We had a grade school, grades 1 through 8. We didn't have kindergarten at that time. It's in position now. And we had a 2-room high school with 2 teachers. And I was a member of the largest graduating class Washington Island High had ever had.
And how many of you were there?
14. And we still hold the record. We were what was known as the war babies. Yes. So that was great fun. I had opportunity, shall I go on from this point and share that I was given an opportunity to go to a county teachers college. And that was an experience for me because, believe it or not, my family never left the island at any time as a complete family to go anywhere for any reason. So we rarely, with dairy, cows and animals to take care of, somebody always had to stay there. So trips off the island were rare. So this was a whole new world for me, even though it was a small area where I attended. And I think the thing that blessed me, but it also surprised me and I didn't quite know how to act, is when I would be able to come back to that island on breaks from college. It was such a different experience, and it showed how much my mom had missed me. She would have made a special meal depending on what time that ferry boat brought me home. She had set the table with placemats even and sat down with me and enjoyed talking and visiting with me. Now that just felt really different, but that's a memory that I treasure.
In the early years in elementary school, you had separate grades?
Yes, yes, but first and second grade were in the primary room. Okay. Intermediate was 3rd, 4th, and 5th, and then 7th and 8th grade were in the not the high school, the junior high, I guess we could call that. Mm-hmm. So there were 3 teachers.
It's kind of hard to imagine what that schooling experience would be like, but I'm sure it was really, everybody was very close-knit, weren't they?
Indeed, indeed. And we also knew that we'd better behave in class, because if we didn't, the teachers would send a report to our parents, very definitely. And being such a small island and close-knit, everybody knew everyone else. That's why it's such a blessing with the waving thing to others, because that's what ACV really promotes as well.
What about your religious upbringing?
We were definitely a part of a Ethel church, it was called. And this church was established in 1865. And it sat real near one of the shores. You couldn't see it because of the trees in between that and the lakeside, but it was available, I think, for early boaters that perhaps would come. I'm not sure. And I thought a very interesting thing was that my great-grandmother's name was on the paperwork of the originators, the founding fathers, so to speak. For that century. I thought that was really unique.
Did you know your grandparents and great-grandparents?
Grandma and Grandpa Bilton, that would have been my mom's mom and dad, had a cottage on the west shore of the island, and they lived in Elmhurst, Illinois, but they would come up every summer for vacation. And Grandpa brought his boat and motor. And now, being on this little island, we as children never took off to go swimming. I mean, there was so much work to do and responsibilities. So this was a rare treat. And so we would be able to spend time down there with Grandma and Grandpa. And he, as twilight came, he would build a bonfire on the beach, and we'd sing our hearts out. And daytime, he'd take us for a ride across the water. And there again, I would be singing over the sound of the motor, but it was so freeing, and it was something new for us. Mm-hmm. Yeah. My dad's mom and dad, Grandpa Jensen, had passed before I ever came along. He passed at an earlier age, and my dad became a father figure as the oldest of 6 boys in that family. So, but Grandma I knew, my older brother, I have one brother older, 2 years, and he pronounced her grandma as Ghani. So she was Ghani to us, her life. And she taught me how to drink coffee, and I love it to this day. Only I don't drink it the way she was pouring the sugar into the cup and the milk. No, it's got to be straight up.
That's right. That's the way I like it. Tell me about after you graduated from college.
My very first teaching job took me to a little community called Fish Creek, and that is on the Door Peninsula, about halfway down on the inside of your thumb. And I drove an old Nash Rambler, which my Uncle Jake had sold me for $10.
What a deal.
Yeah, the kind that looked just like an inverted bathtub. Well, mine came equipped with 3 rotten tires. So the very first day that I arrived in Fish Creek with my vehicle and my possessions, I needed the garage. And this tall, very handsome gentleman named Norm was the owner of a Standard Oil gas station and garage. I met him the very first day I was in the village. And time passed, and the fall, we were teaching, and I would have to walk the children from the grade school past the gas station down toward the water to where the public library was, because our school at that time wasn't equipped with a library. So those were always interesting days, and he would notice and I would notice. And finally, that fall, he invited me out on our first date. And a week later, I think it was our second date, and then the third week was my birthday. And then from there, we began dating regularly, and he proposed on Valentine's Day, and we were married June 16th in 1962.
And where were you married?
On Washington Island.
I figured that was going to be the answer.
That was at 8 o'clock at night, because the little village of Fish Creek, like I said, was a big tourist area, and Norm, being in business, one of the business people, knew all of, most of his friends had cottages or whatever for rent. So we had to wait, because Saturday was the changeover day. The people that had been there would leave. You needed to clean and redo the cottage and then book in the new people. So we scheduled it for 8 o'clock at night. And then what we did was we chartered an airplane. A little, I think there were 4 people, because there was a pilot and a friend of his, co-pilot, whatever, and Norm and I in the back seat. And they flew us to the airport down a little further on the thumb, where Norm had left the car, and we had it packed and ready to go. And we drove further down into the state of Wisconsin to Manitowoc, where there was a car ferry service, the Badger, that would go across Lake Michigan to Lansing. And we had reservations on that for no, 1 o'clock in the morning, I think it was. At any rate, we took a wrong turn and missed the boat by 5 minutes. So our wedding night was spent in Manitowoc Hotel on the 8th floor. And we just were able to catch the boat the next day.
So after you were married, you continued to live in Fish Creek.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes, yes.
And tell us about life there and in your early marriage, and you had
Well,
children.
Yes, we weren't getting pregnant, so we looked into adoption, and we adopted. First, because we had no children yet, we said we just want a baby, if we can get a baby. 9 months later, our 3-month-old daughter arrived. Couldn't have done it quicker ourselves. And then in timing it so that they would be about 2 years apart, we ordered our son. And precious Timothy arrived in 9 months.
And so they grew up together very closely.
They did.
Tell us about them now and what they're doing.
Sheila lives in our home in Fish Creek, or in Egg Harbor. We moved from one community to another community upon Norm's retirement. And so she and her husband are there, and the home will be hers upon my passing. And they've added an addition to it, and because they have a combined marriage with children and grandchildren, and so it'll be very, very good for them to have that. And let's see.
Your son?
My son is, he did his stint in the Marines. He's had a bit of a rocky journey, but, I just keep trusting God's hand upon his life. He cooks quite a bit. Right now he's working at a VFW in a city back in Wisconsin. And we try to keep in touch, but it's a busy world. He's single, so.
So as you and Norm got your 2 children, and how did you attend church together, or how?
We did. There was a little community church right in the village, and that's where he had grown up, right in the village nearby, and so this was very comfortable, and we appreciated the message that was going on there. Just dipping back a moment, I did reach that point when I realized that I needed to make my own personal decision for Jesus Christ when I was 12 years old. Like, it occurred to me, God does not have grandchildren. You have to make your connection personally with him, and I certainly did. I was named after an Aunt Ethel who had a large influence in my life. She was a single lady who was a missionary her entire life with the Salvation Army. So she served in Africa and Hong Kong and 5 or 6 cities around the United States, and worked extremely hard. And then when Norm and I went out to celebrate her 80th birthday, she was living in Mesa, Arizona at the time, we discovered that she needed to have some memory care. We talked to her landlord, and things weren't safe the way it was going. So that journey, it was a busy time when we went out there that particular month. We were able to secure a place and get her all settled. And the beautiful thing was, she thought it was her next assignment. So that eased the moving into this situation for her very much. So she really had an influence in my life.
I'll just show our viewers. This is a book that Ethel wrote, and she shared it with me, and I'm enjoying it, but I've already met Aunt Ethel.
Oh, good.
Yes. So I'm glad to hear more of that story, and I'm sure you have other great ones to share there. So once you were in church.
Yeah. And so, and Norm had been raised in a little bit different kind of church than I'd been used to, but he had such a deep found faith in the Lord, and that was very evident in his walk. So yes, we definitely were a churched family. And my teaching career, I said, if one of my children had done this, I'd have really been upset with him. I taught for 1.5 years and quit. In the middle of the year. I can't believe yet I did that. But God used the time for me anyway, and he gave me, actually what brought about this change was that my mom passed at 53 from ovarian cancer, way too young. And through her death, I met the manager of a large Christian bookstore near Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And it so touched my heart. And upon praying through that whole time, God showed me that I could open a Christian bookstore in our little village. And I did that in 1973, on Memorial Day weekend. And about 2 years after that, I had opportunity to open a second store in our county seat city, which for obvious reasons was larger. And the first one then was closed. And those were thrilling years to have that option and opportunity to share Jesus Christ through printed material, through meaningful gifts and so forth. A fire put me out of business with that, and there had been a new ministry opening up in our area, Stonecroft Ministries. Did you want me to share about that right now? Sure. It was the era when moms got to stay home and raise their children, and so Stonecroft would initiate luncheons where we could invite the unchurched friend. We would provide free nursery care for them, and then present this beautiful luncheon opportunity so they could meet other women, and they could also hear the story of Jesus Christ presented by a speaker who would share her testimony with the gospel cloaked carefully in it so they could grasp it. I was privileged to become involved with that organization for, I think I figured out it was 24 years, and I became a speaker as well as an area rep and prayer advisor and so forth, chairman. But it was thrilling. I had the privilege of sharing over 200 times at various venues for it.
And I understand recently you were presenting at the Women's Prayer Breakfast here.
I did. That was such a great time. I was privileged to do that. I think hearing each other's stories so builds our faith, encourages our heart. And so I was happy to do that. Yeah, thank you.
During that time, it was also a time that women's roles were really changing, beginning to, I'm sure.
Yes.
And probably not so much had women had the opportunity to hear messages from other women.
Right.
Or the message from other women.
This is very true. We had a very successful Christian Women's Club, it was called. I don't remember the exact number of years it spanned, but at about the time when women started going into the workforce, and there just wasn't the ability for them to be able to do both. We did have some evening meetings, but even that, when the mom's been working all day, it's hard to get out at night besides, so that eventually those disappeared because there were other means of communication and online doing things and so forth. But it was a precious time when it was happening. I was happy for it.
And then, what year did your husband die?
In 2015, week before Christmas.
Oh my goodness.
And God did such a precious thing for me through that, as well as for Norm. He'd been home with us the night before. He was 13 years older than I was, and it was a little difficult for him to get around. He was having issues, but he was no memory problems or any of those things. And so he was home with me, and it was a rough night, and so I called my daughter about 5 in the morning, and she said, "Mom, I'll be right there." She lived a mile away. And we called 911, and from the time he was checked into the hospital, 9 hours later, he was with Jesus. I said, I had such joy for him. Mm-hmm. He didn't have to lay in a hospital. He didn't hurt. You know, he was. I didn't have to make any decisions. I was so thrilled for him, and as a result of that, I was able to present this happy, joyful attitude. I got home 2:30 in the morning, my daughter and I, from his passing, and I told her, "Don't be worried about me if you can't get me on my phone in the morning, because I know I'm going to be in church. I need to be with the church family." And I was, and I walked in, and Pastor said, "What are you doing here?" "I'm going to the hospital right after the service." And I said, "Too late, Norm's with Jesus." And I was able to stand and give glory to the Lord for how he had orchestrated Norm's journey. Mm-hmm. And on my own, no, that was from the Lord. But I think through that, and I'll make this really quick, through that grieving experience, I have become a brand new appreciator of this grieving journey. I really believe that God orchestrates everybody's journey of grieving personally. I really do. No two should be alike, nor should anyone ever tell somebody they should be done grieving or whatever. It's very personal. Length doesn't matter. God knows, and he's on the journey with each person.
And it sounds like you and Norm had a wonderful journey together as well.
We did. He was a quiet, very quiet German gentleman, and very kind. Yeah.
Can you think of, other than your romantic engagement on Valentine's Day, a special memory you'd like to share with him, about him?
Oh, he was thoughtful, and I remember when he used to do service calls, and so he went out this one day to fix a tractor on a Walter's maple syrup farm. And I think there could have been another Valentine's Day, because he came back with and those were the days that it was in a metal can. It looked like like a building, and he presented that to me. So he didn't have very many words to share with me, but it was things like that. I just thought of one more little funny story, if you're so, Now, he lived at home till he was 33 years old, and he was Mom's only son, so it could have been a horrible situation, but my mother-in-law was the most precious woman in the world. She lived to be 101 and a half. And my mom, I'm kind of remembering these things as they're coming. My mom dying at 53, God gave me the best mother-in-law I could have ever had, and made up almost that difference, doubling it.
Thank you so much for sharing that.
You're welcome.
And now we have Ethel and Ken back together, because their story started how many years ago? Well, basically it started when each of you became a widow or widower.
Yes.
And you had prayers that you offered, both of you?
I did. I said, "Lord, I'm lonely, but, oh yeah, you know that, okay. But I don't know if I want another man." "Oh, you know that too. You know if there should or should not be." "Okay, well, if you send me somebody, I think I'd like that." That's the only prayer I uttered about it.
Ken, how would you describe that up to that point?
Well, I was grieving, I was lonely, but I wasn't looking. I knew that God and I were good friends. We'd already been serving him a long time. And I knew if he wanted me to have somebody, he would put her in my path. And that's the way it happened.
So Ethel, how did that path get united?
It was strange because God had really dropped a thought into my heart, and he said that my church was looking for a new pastor back in Wisconsin. And that's when I kind of chuckled and said, "Oh, and they're going to hire a man in his 80s?" And it was like, no. But the man they bring in will have lost his mom or his mother-in-law. And I was, it blew my mind. I couldn't believe that. And I tucked it inside and never told a soul. I'm pounding on my mic. I never told anybody. So now that was like in January. Fast forward to August, and I'm back in Wisconsin, and part of a service in the state park there. That Sunday in August, this couple came through candidating to be the pastor. And very quickly, after the service, I had a chance just to talk briefly with his wife. And in 5 minutes' time, she told me her mom had passed from ovarian cancer a year before. And I had that connection. I was so sorry, and said I would pray for her. And she said, yes, and my dad is really grieving. And I said, I can pray with understanding about that too.
And how long did it take for the two of you to meet?
We didn't meet till March of 2019, but we connected on the phone in January 19th of 2019, I think, yeah. And we began to realize that God was doing a work here. It was like we stood off from a distance and just watched it happening. And one night I remember crawling into bed and saying, "Oh Lord, I think I'm falling in love with Ken. What do you think about that?" The very next day when Ken called me, that next night, he said the same thing to me. And we began to realize that God was bringing us together for a purpose.
And that's why I wanted us to share this at this time, in this way, to see how the two of your lives have come together. Mm-hmm. And it will be a whole other story to tell about how you got to Advent Christian Village. But there are some roots there too, Ken, right, with your father living nearby.
Yes.
Well, thank you both for coming and sitting down and sharing today.
Oh, it's been such fun, a privilege.
Thank you.
Thank you both. And thanks for joining us. Come back again to see another Front Porch Conversation.